Hello friends, my name is Beth Ball of D&D Duet and Grove Guardian Press. Thank you so much for joining me for our new video. Today we're going to be talking about how to start a new duet campaign. And specifically, we're going to be looking at how to start a new one-on-one D&D campaign and thinking about it with our first couple of points of if you've played in a one-on-one campaign before. So let me back up for just a moment in case you're new. First, welcome. Second, when we talk about playing one-on-one D&D, we mean one player and one GM or DM, whichever term you prefer is fine. And so when we're playing in this style, there are a few different story-based considerations that we want to take into account, such as the way I think of it is like if we have traditional D&D or D&D for a group where one GM is leading a story for a bunch of heroes, almost like we would have in Lord of the Rings. In a duet game or a duet campaign, one GM is leading a story for one hero, more like we would see in Harry Potter, the Hunger Games, something along those lines. So just we're focusing in. But the other shift I think it's important to keep in mind is that in this instance, if we have GMs here and players here, they've each taken a step towards one another in a one-on-one campaign. And so while it might seem on the outside like the GM is taking even more control than they normally would because they're leading a story for just one person, one character, one player, in actuality, I think the GM has to take a step back in terms of control and give more of that control over to the player. And the player in that instance needs to know what their character wants, their character's motivations. We talk about this on the blog. We'll talk about this in today's video as well. And so the player, the protagonist, the main character, the hero of the story has to be doing the driving forward of the plot. And so these are the considerations, the things that need to be taken into account, the things that need to be in place before you can start a new campaign. And so with our first point, number one thing we're going to do if we're starting a new campaign and we've played one before is we want to reflect on past campaigns. What have we liked about those? What's gone well? And what changes would we like to see? Do we want to kind of bring to the table? And I'm going to weave some of mine and Jonathan's recent experience into today's video. And I'll be talking about our new campaign. It's been really fun so far, but I'll be talking about our new campaign some throughout this video and this series of videos on GM prep, running a campaign, kind of the in and out of session by session. And that's something that we haven't done before. Our old series, Tales of Eldura, was a campaign that I ran, an adaptation of Descent into Avernus, kind of blending that campaign with our own and looking at how do we adapt a published campaign, especially a campaign that was published for a group game. How do we adapt that for a one-on-one audience? In this case, there are a couple of GM videos for that campaign where I show the Google Doc that I had running and that sort of thing. We'll do a little bit of that here. My GMing style has changed to some extent. And so if you want to see that and that campaign setup, I'll link those videos below. Outside of that, when we are looking to start a new campaign, thinking about what's worked well for us before, kind of in as broad strokes as you can get it. So one of the problems that I've run into in the past as the storyteller, as the GM, is I get stuck. This is a problem I've run into as a novelist often, but in that case, no one's waiting on me moment to moment, week by week for me to figure out what happens next. And so I can just put that novel on the back burner and come back to it a week later, even a couple months later, and move the story forward. In a D&D campaign, that's a little trickier because Jonathan's waiting on me for us to play that next weekend. We'd like to play together every week. We usually play Saturday and Sunday. And so you'll see that again as we go through this new series and I kind of guide you through my GM experience. But he's waiting on me to kind of figure out what happens next in the story. And if I'm stuck and continue being stuck, then it can get, I think sometimes the pressure of someone waiting for you can make that stuckness worse. Whereas being able to relieve the pressure and just set something to the side can help alleviate that. And so if getting stuck as a GM and looking for inspiration or ways of getting unstuck, if that's of interest to you, that is something that I'm hoping to talk more about. I have a couple posts on the blog from 2023 that I think would be of interest to you or would be helpful. But that's something I'm increasingly interested in, as I don't know that it's something we talk enough about in the D&D community, in the tabletop gaming community, but it is something that comes up often in creative writing and fiction communities. And so that's something I would like to bring into our conversation and space here, different strategies, things for us to try. And so I know for me, when I've gotten stuck in campaigns in the past, that's been in part because my character, my GMPC, has run into something in the story world that she doesn't understand. So when I'm creating a story, whether it's D&D or a novel, I tend to do so through the eyes of my character. And so when in our last campaign, when the characters ended up in the Shadowlands, where my character had never been before, I got a little stuck. And so because she was stuck with, well, what do we do? What happens next? Because the world had opened up beyond her understanding and experience. And so knowing that, I knew for this new campaign that I needed a character who knew more than Jonathan's character about what they would be dealing with in the world, but not so much that she wouldn't be an equal kind of co-runner around in the world with him. So I didn't want the GMPC to be a guide. I want her to be an equal to the PC in the campaign. But I knew that she would need to know more, at least in terms of what options are available to them, than Jonathan's character, because if she knows those things, then it's less likely that I'm going to get stuck. And so that's just one example of how can we figure out, how can we kind of problem solve, troubleshoot things that have been an issue for us or stumbling block in the past, and how do we prevent that from happening as we go into the future. So do your reflection. If this is your first campaign, then you don't have to worry so much about that reflection, and you can think instead, and so now we'll all be on the same page. We want to find characters, a story, and the creative tools that both the GM and the player need to be successful. And so if you've never played in a one-on-one campaign before, we actually wrote a campaign just for you. Not a campaign, it's a 3-adventure arc on DM's Guild. It's called the Crystal and Curse Trilogy. I'll link that for you below as well. And so we based that on the first game that Jonathan ever ran for me, but we created it specifically to people who are new to D&D and people who are new to duet gaming. And so when we're thinking about our steps to craft this new campaign, we've made adjustments from our previous campaign. Now we want to figure out what we both want. And if you can look at what do you want, not just what do you not want. So Jonathan wanted to play a wizard. We talked about character age and experience and kind of played around with what would those two choices, because that might seem kind of innocuous of like, well, I want to play a younger character, I want to play an older character, I want to start at level 1, I want to start on level 5. But in terms of the story, in duet gaming, the characters themselves are really important because, again, the main character, the protagonist, is the one who's driving the story. They're the engine. And so the engine that you put in the car is going to matter for the performance of the car. And so we played out, if we make this character decision, what would that campaign arc look like versus if we make this other character decision? And we kind of teased out some of those stories. And that's one of the spaces that as a GM, I think we can kind of second guess ourselves of like, I don't want to tell them too much. But instead of withholding information, we want the player to be on the same page as us in terms of the type of story that we were trying to tell. And so if you know kind of what you might want, even just a loose idea, so for me, I knew that I wanted to have planes hopping. So not just in one world, but in a couple different worlds. That's something that I'm working on creatively with my writing right now. I wanted characters who would be able to do that. And so I was really upfront with Jonathan that that's something I would want this character to be able to do. And so he was trying to decide if he wanted to play a younger wizard who's hungry for knowledge but inexperienced, looking to prove himself, or an older wizard character who does maybe still has something to prove or is looking for redemption, but is more aware of his potential. And so he decided on the younger wizard character, and it's been really fun so far. So these sort of steps are key, are really important to getting yourself off on the right foot to take that time and set up. And that conversation lasted over the course of a weekend where we kind of sat down and said, I don't think that we're we decided we didn't want to push forward with the campaigns that we had been running. We do tend to kind of cycle in and out of them, but we decided we wanted to start something new. The campaigns I run for him before, they're stuck, and so I'm sure at some point they'll get unstuck. But I told him, like, if you want me to be the DM, then we'll need to start a new thing. And so we we got going, and oh, that was it. So we spent about, I think, at least a weekend talking over those character concepts, and then let it sit for a little while, and then got going again. I think it was probably 2 weeks later that we actually started playing this new campaign. And so I'll talk about what some of the steps we took over those 2 weeks were. Um, Let me just check my notes. So both of you being on the same page about character motivation will go a long way toward your campaign being easier to run, play, and plan. There's a post on this on the D&D Duet blog about character motivation and how important it is, especially for the PC. I'll link that for you below as well. I'm also planning a follow-up video to this one to continue the conversation we touched on a moment ago about the temptation to keep too many secrets from your player and their PC, as this can decrease the player's buy-in to the experience. So for the short version, because the PC is the one driving the story, they need to know what kind of story they're in, where they are, and what's happening around them in order to fully engage. So they have to know they have to have a rough overview in order to be able to make decisions to move things forward. Where if you just keep things super open, it's going to be a little bit harder for your player to know what even their options are for taking their first steps. So if you've been playing D&D for a while but can think back to when you very first started playing and your DM, they're so excited, or maybe you were the DM who was so excited in this instance, and you're like, okay, what do you want to do? And your player just looks back at you like, I have no idea, because they don't have any idea of what the options are. In that same instance, if you leave things too open for your player and their PC in the campaign without guiding them, giving them options, giving them an idea of what's going on, it can be kind of overwhelming with what steps should they even try to take. So we have a character, we have a campaign concept, and we have motivation. From there, we started the character backstory. And so Jonathan wrote a brief character backstory for me. I'll show it to you in a subsequent video where I show some of the tools that I've been pulling in. I have a notebook, a Google Doc, and Post-its, and Jonathan's character backstory. So we decided for things to be simple at the beginning to keep the PC in the world of Azuria, with plans for them to move outside of Azuria soon, but that worked better for me with still setting up some of these other worlds that they're going to be traveling to. And so with Jonathan's backstory for his character, whose name is Edwin slash Sarek, we'll talk about his backstory soon. I was able to sketch out the backstory for my GMPC and to introduce him and his character to her, as well as the people he already knows in the world during our session 0. And so for session 0, I had a sketch of the people that he would need to interact with and a list of names ready. That's a key kind of tool to keep in your pocket. We really love fantasy name generators for this. You can use whatever tool that you like, but I also keep a running list of names on my phone for campaigns and stories, so that if I need that kind of perfect name in the moment, I can pull on it And for me, names are really important. I tend to do a lot of research. I need the name to sound right, feel right in the moment. But if I've already looked into the meaning of the name, its history, its associations, any mythology connected to it, what the etymology or origin of the name is, anything that I don't want to have associated with the character, if I've done that research already, then I don't have to do it when I kind of conceive of a character, and I can put concept to name and be ready to go. I also, before we got started with our first session, and this is a key tip to make your life easier, I asked Jonathan if there was anything that he wanted to do in his first session and made sure that we were set up to do that. We also, when we first started talking about the campaign, looked through the Strixhaven book together for inspiration and atmosphere, since his young wizard character, since he has a young wizard character, we thought we might begin at a magical academy. And even just looking over the art together and kind of touching on, well, this could be kind of cool, or this would be an interesting experience, was really helpful. In my discussions with Jonathan, returning to character motivation, I learned that his character wanted to challenge himself, to lean into his magical abilities, and to become a great wizard. Lots of stories with wizards, like we'll see with Gale in Baldur's Gate 3, whom I love, they involve the balance, lots of these stories involve the balance between power and longevity. Wizards have so much potential, but only a limited amount of time. And from novel writing, I've learned how meaningful it can be in a story to place the protagonist and the villain, or actually you put all the characters, but specifically right now we'll look at protagonist and villain along a single spectrum of an ideal. And so if Jonathan's PC is struggling with the allure of power and how to balance that with his other responsibilities in the world, the villain is going to decidedly not value that balance and fall on the wrong side of this scale. So Jonathan's character backstory had already set me up with the villain, or at least a villain, for our campaign. That character didn't show up for the first few sessions, but we're in, I'd say, session 3 from this past weekend, 3/4. And so he's beginning to dip his toes into the action of the world, but his influence over Jonathan's character's past has still played a role in even in session 0, we kind of saw his impact or imprint in the world. For early sessions in a campaign, I think back to how much I enjoyed the setup that we used in First Blush. And again, you can find that adventure on DM's Guild. So for early sessions, I like to keep the stakes low and give the player a chance to settle into the body and mannerisms of their PC. This can also work well if you do have friends who you're playing in a group game with. We don't do that very often, but if and when we do, or we're playing with family, I will kind of trial out a character concept to see how I feel about this character's personality mixed with their stats, and kind of see about some of those balance aspects and get into a voice, mannerisms, way of being, way of thinking. Character immersion is a key part of one-on-one D&D. And it's one of our favorite parts of gameplay for both me and Jonathan. And it can take some time to figure out the nuances of your character. And so I knew I had done this well with this kind of low-key setup when Jonathan told me after our first session that there had been things that surprised him about his character, how there were parts of his personality that he hadn't anticipated in his character design. And so that told me that I had given both him and the character enough space to kind of test the waters, so to say, um, and try out some things where I'd pushed him enough, allowed him to talk to enough people, make enough decisions, move his story forward in such a way that he got to discover some new things, but not so much that he had to kind of fall into a stereotype to make other weightier, heavier decisions. And so now you know the basics for starting a new campaign. Yay! Look back to go forward, figure out the basics and what you both want. What are the character aspects and the kind of story you want to tell? Work with the player to create a bare bones PC backstory and design a few low stakes interactions that will let the PC make choices and move the story forward from the get go while still getting to know their character. And from there, you'll be set up for a great D&D campaign. And with that, we are pretty comfortable with one another when I say, like, okay, well, what would your general day? And in the Hedverian Arcanium look like? And Jonathan will be able to kind of fill in some of those things. And if there's something that catches my attention or imagination in that moment, then we can play through it together. If you are new, or especially if your player is new, they may not be as comfortable doing that in the moment. And so that's something that will come with time, but be ready in those moments to kind of tease out of the player some more detailed questions. Make sure that they know that it's not only safe and okay, but encouraged for them to really add to this world. And just in case you're looking for a new campaign to start with your duet partner, we are just a couple of days away from our Kickstarter launching. And by the time you see this video, it may be the day before or the day of our Kickstarter launch for the compiled Land of Vampires campaign. So it will be on Kickstarter starting January 31st of 2024. I'll have links in the description below where you can find out more. We are so excited to be at this step with our campaign. It's been a long time coming, and we just cannot wait to share this world of Steinbrod with you. And the campaign goes through a lot of the steps that I've just outlined, where it will help you create the PC backstory. You'll have some different GMPCs to choose from, and even you could let the PC choose the GMPC in the moment if you want. And we'll have all of that guidance for you in the campaign. And again, you can learn more on the page. We would love for you to join us on this part of the adventure. And in our next video, I'll show you more of the tools that I use to prep the campaign and keep my notes organized as our campaign goes. I've been trying to make this easier and more streamlined since the last campaign that I ran, where I basically filled up one of, I actually have one here. I basically filled up one of these notebooks the last time I was running a campaign, which was really cool and helpful. And then turning that campaign into a novel, that was also helpful because I had detailed notes, but it was kind of an exhausting prep experience. I don't want my prep to take as long as it takes to run the campaign. I'm sure that you don't either. And so I'm working on it being more bare bones so that Jonathan and his PC have more choices instead of me needing to anticipate all of the different possibilities. So some of that has come with learning to trust myself more as a GM and getting more comfortable in that role. I'm usually the player in our campaign. And so with all of that, please leave any GM prep questions you have, or if there's something you're wondering about setting up for a new campaign, let me know in the comments below, and I'll see you in the next video and on our Kickstarter. Thank you so much.